I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. In this episode of the HMNS Beyond the Bones podcast, Kat Havens and I discuss the intensely interesting topic of mummification. And there's no way to sugarcoat what I'm about to say. It gets morbidly descriptive at times. So consider this a fair warning. Things may get a bit squeamish here and there throughout this otherwise fascinating discussion. Now, relax and enjoy an enlightening conversation between Kat and I as we stand in front of one of our beloved resident Egyptian mummies in our beautiful Hall of Ancient Egypt at HMNS. Kat, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm very excited to be in my very favorite hall at the museum.
On your very favorite podcast.
It is my very favorite podcast, I have to be honest.
Let's just start at the beginning.
Yep.
Do you know when mummification began in Egypt or kind of how it got picked up?
The progression, maybe?
Yeah.
So, okay, as we all know, most of Egypt, aside from being near the river, is desert, right?
Right.
And so when they would bury their dead, they would do it in the sand, right? So sand pit burials is what they would call them.
Yeah.
They would put them in there. And then unfortunately, or fortunately,
Right.
with the shifting sands because of the winds or, wild animals in the desert digging around, they would get uncovered sometimes.
Yeah.
And they found that these bodies had been naturally preserved from being in contact with that hot sand.
Right. Yeah.
And so they were natural mummies. And we think that is where the idea for the process came from. And when you're burying in the sand, you don't really have to worry about doing artificial preservation, right? Because the sand is doing that job for you. But when we have the invention of tombs, right? Or lining these sand pits so that the body's not in contact with the sand, that's a problem.
Right.
Because then your body or the body is going to deteriorate. It's going to decay.
But that arid climate,
Yep.
it wouldn't work in humidity. You
No,
couldn't do this, lay them out in a bog in Louisiana and expect them to preserve.
No.
They would
Absolutely
deteriorate
not.
very quickly.
They'd be gone in less than, or at least very down to skeletal and very quickly, right? Depending on the weather.
Right. And then fossilization is a whole different mineralization.
Totally different,
Totally different area of the museum.
Saponification or all kinds
Right.
of different things can happen, but those take very special conditions such as, soil acidity or alkalinity, those kind of things.
Right. The water, the silica that replaces
Exactly.
the bone and everything like that.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about the nitty gritty. I think a lot of people are going to tune into this podcast and they want to hear about the process
I love the process.
of mummification. When somebody passes away, what is the first step in the mummification process?
Well, they're going to be taken to the embalmers, and the embalmers were families, right? So these are going to be groups of people who pass down this technology. It's never written down. It's a big secret, right?
Oh, okay.
And so they're going to be washed with water from the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think they would do that? What's
Holy,
special about it's holy.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they're going to be washed completely down.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is it about a mummy that's going to make it decay the fastest?
I would say moisture, humidity. Yeah.
Moisture, humidity, but also the moisture in the body. I think we're about 63% water.
Oh, yeah.
Some people a little bit more, depending on if you're male or female or how old you are, et cetera.
Right.
So they've got to get that moisture out. So they've got to remove the juicy organs on the inside.
Juicy.
They're
We're not talking about
juicy.
steaks here. We're talking about
It starts sounding a little bit like food, which is creepy, but
Outback.
also makes it fun.
Yeah.
And then also, sometimes, not always, but in a real fancy mummification, they're going to remove the brain as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Brain is first. Ooh, this is the great part.
Yeah.
So they're going to take a sharp instrument and a mallet, and they're going to insert that sharp instrument up the nose, pow, pow, breaking that bone at the back.
Yeah.
Right? And then we used to think that they would try to pull it out piece by piece, but they did a modern mummification, and it turns out that's not really a thing.
Okay.
So it's like the doctor who tried to do the modern mummification, likened it to trying to pull tofu out of a wine bottle with a fondue fork. So not happening. So they had to solve this problem, right?
Yeah.
So what they think happened was they would kind of scramble it like an egg, like really, really briskly move it around, turn that mummy on its face, or turn that body on its face rather, and let that liquid flow out by gravity.
Yeah.
And they said it looks like a strawberry milkshake.
Work smarter, not harder. I'm not saying that it probably wasn't hard to
It was probably really hard.
make brain soup. I can only
We're
I'm
doing
gonna put
strawberry milkshakes for you right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Podcast is over.
Podcast is over. We're done.
I'm kidding. No, but that's that is super fascinating. And that's one of the things, in paleontology, I talked to Colin and Ryan and David. it's loosely connected in my mind, at least, to a term called actualism.
Okay.
Where you kind of wonder, well, how did this Triceratops live its life? How did it kind of maneuver and walk and do its thing? You're like, well, we don't have Triceratops anymore, but we
Right.
do have rhinos
Yeah.
and buffalo. Like, we have modern animals.
And birds, yeah.
Yeah, and that you can draw hypotheses from.
Sure.
For instance, the Triceratops horn, we figured out, is more like a bison's horn. It has the keratinous sheath, and it has blood vessels going through it.
It's alive.
It's not like a tusk of an elephant. That's a completely different material, comes from a different place. But you look at how things are done in modern times. So the doctor that you talked about, who performed that first part of
he did the whole
mummification
mummification,
project.
which
Yeah.
makes it interesting.
And the fact that he figured out, and I would assume that he was using tools that kind of would be analogous to what
they reproduced the tools. And so we found tools, right? At least a lot of them. And so they very carefully went and reproduced these tools to use. They were trying to make this authentic as possible, even down to the humidity in the room that they used to try to match it to the heat and humidity of what it might have been like to be mummifying an individual in ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
So they were very rigorous and scientific about it.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. They recreated the actual instruments to put themselves in their shoes and ask that question or bring up the hypothesis that, they pulled it out like
Piece by piece.
tofu or whatever, and we found out by doing it again
Doesn't work.
that doesn't work.
Yep.
What does work is making the strawberry
On both sides,
whatever.
up each nostril.
Yeah, and just
scrambling.
and then turning them over
Yep.
and letting gravity do most of the work. That makes total sense. And why wouldn't it be that way? It's really interesting.
Well, and they only had a few writings to go on, right? Because like I said, the Egyptians didn't write it down for whatever reason, whether it was a trade secret or whether there was some kind of magic to not writing it down. Either could be true or both could be true.
Right.
But we did have writings of some ancient not ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, right? And they're not always reliable, but parts of it are. And it was Herodotus that told us about pulling the brain out piece by piece. So he was right about the up the nose, just wrong about the removal process.
And that and that part, I'm just speculating here on the podcast. Is just thinking out loud. I don't want to speculate to a conclusion.
You got to ask the question.
Exactly. Maybe the part about pulling this out that way, the little bits, maybe that was kind of the last part after you roll the mummy back over, and then maybe try to get the last little.
It could be. And once they got everything out, they did insert what would be akin to gauze. It's like linen strips that were soaked, and they would go up with the water and palm wine also, which is a very alcohol-heavy drink, if you will. And they would go up and they would clean inside of the head, right? Inside of the skull, before they would pour the resin in to sort of make the skull hold its shape so it wouldn't collapse.
Interesting. And I wonder if there was maybe at least 2 rounds of gauze or of packing.
I'm sure.
Right. You get the bulk of it out. Sorry to be so blunt about it. Get the bulk of whatever's in the brain case out, and then pack it up with the things, and then pull that out with.
Oh, they absolutely would do that.
Yeah.
I would think.
Right.
Anyway,
Soak
because
up
it had a little hook that could hook onto that linen.
Right.
That was part of the material. So I think that's a really good guess.
Yeah.
They could kind of put the linen in there, twist it so they could, get it up in there and it would hold into place. Right. And the other thing that's interesting, I like things to fit in neat little boxes, which nothing ever does, right? And so when I first kind of tackled this, I wanted mummification to be blank, 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 blank. Then you do this. But they've mummified for thousands of years, right? And depending on how much money you had to spend, which particular group was doing your mummification, what period of time you were in, it might have been a little different. Right? Or a lot different.
I think that's something very interesting to remember about any sort of historical study. Is that we try to pinpoint one piece of time, one day in time.
And then it was over.
And represent that doesn't represent the 5,000 years or the centuries. In our brains, we kind of think of this one day that they were doing a mummification, but it's a
long period of time.
It would be a process that had been done for generations and generations and centuries, and refined and changed. And you're right there.
And what you had to spend mattered. Yeah. If you were poor, you wouldn't have been mummified. I mean, you still would have been buried in the sand. So there's overlapping things too, right? You still had sandpit burials, right, alongside really fancy mummifications or mummifications that became kind of less quality as time went on, and the processes may have been forgotten or changed or whatever, right? So there's just a lot to it.
Yeah.
But when we talk about it, we're usually talking about sort of the perfect type of mummification, right? A new kingdom mummification.
An archetype of mummification.
Like, yes, exactly.
And then there's variations of it.
Yes.
Like a bell curve of
quality
the mummification. Exactly. Here's the best mummification. Then there's all this and on this side. There's maybe better, maybe worse over here.
Exactly.
And why wouldn't it be over the span of centuries?
Exactly.
So after...
So we got the brain out,
We got the brain out. You mentioned the resin. Can you talk about that part a little
resin is going to be like a conifer, conifer.
Yeah, like pine trees.
Yeah, it's like pine trees. So it's going to be like a sap, right? And they're going to melt that. And they have these little things that look like ancient neti pots. They've got like a 2 little prong thing. They would probably pour water or whatever in there to wash it out. And then they could insert the resin that way too. And we have x-rays where we can see the solidified mass inside of the skull.
Cool.
And like, theoretically, that's going to give a little bit of structure, to the inside of that head so it doesn't collapse or whatever the case may be. It didn't work so well for
this guy.
He's had a rough time after life.
I'm not zooming in on his face.
No.
Not just for respect, but there isn't much of a face here.
No.
It's actually pretty gnarly.
But he's well cared for and well loved now, and well respected, which I think is the most important part. And he's a teacher. He's living again as a teacher.
Right.
And his name keeps being repeated over and over again. And for an ancient Egyptian, that was how they lived, right? As long as your name is being spoken, you never die.
He's achieving immortality.
Right, and I've got goosebumps now.
I know. He's achieving immortality now because he's on a podcast.
Every day.
Yeah, and he's on a podcast now thousands of years later.
He even has a book about him on Amazon now.
Wow.
So you want to know the next steps?
Yes, the next step, brain is out, the resin. About the resin, for some reason, I'm thinking of like changing the coolant in my, I have a classic car and you change the coolant and part of it is burping it. You can't just put the antifreeze in there. Yeah, you have to you can tilt the car a certain way and try to get the bubbles out and whatever.
I bet they probably was some of that. I can't tell you for sure, but why wouldn't there be?
Exactly, because you couldn't have.
Kind of rolling the body around to try to get it to spread evenly as well.
Right, concrete engineers, when they pour concrete, you can't have bubbles or vacancies or whatever within the material because it will weaken the material. So you wouldn't want to have air bubbles in the head.
This is why I love doing podcasts with you. I always get something new to think about. I just really love that because now I'm going to have to look into that.
There was some shimmy. There's shimmy in the skull a little bit.
They had to, right?
To get
it even.
Yeah, exactly.
Too.
I'm going to have to put a disclaimer on this podcast. It's not mature, but maybe have some of a stomach for it.
So the next thing they would do is make an incision.
Okay.
In the left side of his abdomen. There are exceptions, but typically left-hand side.
Yeah,
and there was a person called the cutter. It's a translation, that would use a sharp stone. Obsidian is what we think it was, which is a volcanic stone that holds a very, very sharp edge, sharper than stainless steel surgical blade.
Yeah.
So they'd draw a little line on it, the slitter would come and cut the body, and then he would have to run because the other embalmers would pelt him with small stones for defiling the body. So it was a necessary evil, if you will, but it had to be done. But it was defiling the body. And I don't think they were trying to hurt him or they would run out of people who would be willing to do it. It was ritualistic pelting, right?
Yeah.
So they would make this incision and it wasn't very big. I want to say about 3 inches.
Yeah.
And that modern mummification, they found getting the organs out of that small of a slit was really quite difficult. So they had to enlarge it a little bit.
Yeah.
And the doctor talked about when he reached his arm up in there to take the organs out, it was like trying to reach into a dark closet and untangle a bunch of wire hangers without looking.
Yeah.
So they're all connected by connective tissue, right? The organs aren't just sitting in there independent. They're suspended and connected.
I had to untangle a 100-foot extension cord the other week, and I had the benefit of the full sunshine. And it was still super frustrating.
Yeah.
There was a discouraging word or two that was uttered. And now just imagine... you can't see.
Can you imagine too? It's hot and it's got to be stinky. The body is decaying as they're doing this. That's
the embalming hasn't started.
No.
Yet.
So it's still juicy.
Yeah.
It's still deteriorating, decaying,
right?
And it does quickly, right? Especially in the hot and the sun.
Yeah.
So they're up there and they're removing the organs. So liver, lungs, intestines. Liver, lungs, intestines, and stomach are going to be the important ones.
Was there a sequence? Was that important?
I think the liver probably, I don't know. I'm not very good at internal anatomy, like which one would come out first.
Yeah, I would mean
I
like
would
even
say
ritually.
like the liver.
Okay, yeah.
So in
Makes
that,
sense.
in lobes, so probably not sure if it came out whole or in pieces. That would be hard to say. But then they would take these 4 organs and they would separately mummify them, right?
Which 4?
The lungs, the stomach,
Yeah.
the liver, and the intestines.
Okay.
And intestines are nasty, just in general.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been watching Last of Us. There's some intestine stuff.
Ooh, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Intestines are yucky.
Yeah.
I tried to mummify a rat. And the project didn't last because it's really, even in air-conditioned conditions, was really awful.
You know, the smell of formaldehyde from high school is never gonna
ingrained
escape.
in your brain.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily like an awful memory. It's just it's a very I want to maybe call it a sterile memory.
Sure.
It's
smell
you're
is
working
memory.
with- right.
Smell is memory.
Did you say, not to get too off track, but you sent me a link before we started the podcast of a group that's recreating the embalming.
The smell of a mummy.
The smell of a mummy.
It's like the scent of a woman, except for not. Or actually, in this case, yes,
Right.
a female mummy. And mummies don't smell bad, right? For the most part. They smell kind of earthy, woodsy, sort of incensey, like incense.
After they've been
after
prepared.
thousands of years, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
And so they've recreated and created sort of a scent or perfume, if you will, based on this one noblewoman who had been mummified.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember what they called it.
I'll put it down.
Yeah, you'll put it down. But it was a
Right.
really intriguing article about it.
But that's so fascinating. You would think, dead body decomposition, all this kind of thing. Why would you want to recreate that smell?
It smells quite nice.
Right. After thousands of years,
Yeah.
and then this particular woman who got the perfume, it's kind of counterintuitive. It actually smells
Well,
pretty good.
I've smelled a mummy, and it doesn't smell bad, or the mummy that I had the opportunity to smell. And I know that makes me sound a little bit like creepy, but I was interested, right? I also want to know what a dinosaur tastes like. When you were talking about actualism, I was like, that's what I want to know. Was it chicken or goose or steak?
I would imagine.
I think it's like a goose.
We're
off track.
I don't think, we're getting, but this is what's fun about this is,
I know.
we'll get back to mummification, trust me, but since dinosaurs were so closely related to birds, I'm imagining, but we're also reptiles and it's a whole thing.
It's a whole phylogenetic tree situation.
So it's maybe to get a good idea of what a dinosaur might have tasted like, it would be, let's have a little bit of alligator or croc meat, and then the goose meat. And maybe you can come to some sort of middle ground?
I'm not sure, because birds are theropod dinosaurs. That's a thing now.
Right.
And the chicken is the closest living relative of the T-Rex, right? But I would also think they're probably muscly. And this is totally, I have no actual background in the science. I'm just, spitballing here or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
I would think, because the muscly like a goose, that kind of red meat, but it's still bird meat.
And we'll get right back on it, but bird meat, it would taste way different from animal to animal.
Absolutely.
Just like fish tastes way different.
Right, not everything tastes the same.
Right, so we'll just never know what a trike tastes
And I
like.
really am sad about that.
Scientists, get on it immediately.
Get on it. So we have all these organs out. Now, they didn't take the kidneys. There were things they left behind.
The heart?
The heart was left in place, okay? Because that is going to be, the mummy's going to need that when he goes through judgment, right? He goes through the steps in the afterlife. His heart is going to be weighed in the weighing of the heart ceremony against the feather of truth, or ma'at, okay, on scale.
Yeah.
And if his heart is heavier than the feather of truth, it gets fed to Amit, who is a demon with a crocodile head. Right. And it's devoured, and that person, that's the end of them.
Yeah, that's in the road
right?
for them.
But he's got amulet, right? A big heart scarab that has a spell, which we would say was from the Book of the Dead, which is not a book. It's just a group of different spells. And it would say, don't speak out against me. Basically, shh, don't say the bad things.
Right.
So that heart needs to stay with the mummy inside.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit before we move on, obviously, with this process? Oh gosh, where I was going? Some say that Egyptians ancient Egyptians didn't know what the brain was for. That it was
Right.
just that all, like your thought and everything was down
Yes.
here, your heart and stomach.
Key to your soul, wisdom, thinking, all of that was in your heart.
And this mush up here
mucus.
was mucus or whatever. Obviously, that's since changed. And that and also, when we say that, we cannot speak for every subset of culture
Obviously not.
in ancient Egypt. But that's one theory. They got rid of the brain
And
because
from
they
the
didn't
evidence,
think.
what we have,
Right.
they would discard it if it was removed.
Right.
Right? So it's just gone. So obviously it doesn't have the same importance as the rest of the organs as far as something that this individual would need in the afterlife, because the rest is preserved because they're going to need it.
Right.
They need to be whole, right? The brain, not so much.
So
They
what-
didn't always take the brain out though. Sometimes it just sort of dried up in there, and
Yeah.
you can hear it or see it on scans. So it can stay in.
A little prune just kind of rattling around.
Exactly.
or whatever
Apricot
it turns into. Yeah. So what happens with the organs, the four main organs, what happens after they're removed?
Okay, so after they're removed, they're going to be washed. Okay, palm wine, Nile River water, palm wine. They're going to be dried off. They're going to be put into a substance called natron. Okay, which is a lot like baking soda.
Okay.
It's very similar in composition. More salt in it. So if you added salt to baking soda, it would effectively have the same effect as drawing out moisture.
Yeah.
So if you ever had your mom put like baking soda paste on your bee sting or whatever, that's to draw out, because it is a drawing agent. So they're left in there to dry, right? And it's going to suck that water off, and they're going to, kind of change out the natron until those organs are dried. Then they're going to be wrapped almost like little mummies.
Yeah.
And in the case of the perfect mummification, or the ideal one that we talk about, they're going to be put in canopic jars.
Yeah.
Okay, little jars that protect them. Sometimes they were returned to the inside of the body after the body was dried out.
Right.
Just depended on the time period or how much money you paid or whatever it was that you had planned or the person had planned for their particular mummification.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And there's been something I've wanted to ask. It kind of goes back to, I guess, preparation of the cranium. What's going on with the eyes? during
Okay,
this
well,
process?
eyes are nothing but water for the most part. We've got the lens in there. There's some membranes and things, but they're a hugely amount made of water.
Right.
So a lot of times they would put like little stones or tiny onions or different things in there to keep sort of the shape of that area.
And I'm just thinking of, the physics of you remove the brain and all of
Yeah.
things in there.
Yep.
Were the eyes gonna
Fall in.
Or could they have, during this process, maybe their eyes are removed during that process also and
I
replaced
would think
with?
all of those are possibilities. I wouldn't think they would necessarily remove them, but I'm sure if you're like true crime person or like, the autopsy type show person, that almost immediately the eyes begin to dry up and to shrink.
Right.
So
okay.
by a couple of days in, especially in that kind of heat,
There's nothing
not
to
gonna
do
be
with
much
them
left
much
of them.
anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it probably wasn't an area to focus on other than to prepare for mummification.
and to make this, person look their best self,
Right.
For the afterlife.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a reason not to get too morbid.
Is there?
Although
Is there a reason? I don't know. Could be pretty bad.
Modern funerals, open caskets, usually it's not Mima.
Well, their eyes are shut
Look it up.
for a
Exactly.
reason.
Right.
Yeah, for a good reason,
Yeah.
for sure.
Now in my funeral might be like, hey, just pop a couple marbles in there.
A couple more, like the
Freak out.
little black eyes that they
gosh.
use for what did they do when they stuff it? Taxidermy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Like a serial
right.
killer story right there.
I know. Okay. All right.
Johnny,
Yeah.
do I need to worry about you?
No, you don't.
Okay.
I'm thinking of more. I just like a final joke to play
I
with
do
my
too.
friends.
I do too. I totally
don't-
get you.
A funeral. Obviously, in modern times, it's a way to mourn and remember and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I also kind of want to party,
Yeah.
especially if I lived a
Absolutely.
good life and people love me
Absolutely.
and I love them. Mourn, but also let's be happy. And there are
Yeah.
some cultures around the world that celebrate with the body and have a party with
Absolutely.
the body and everything.
Absolutely.
And back in the Old West, there's stories of outlaws and things and getting all shot up, and then their buddies would basically prop them up and have last drinks with them and
Absolutely.
everything like that. Meanwhile, the guy's all riddled with bullets and
What was the weekend at was it Birdie?
Weekend at Bernie's.
Weekend at Bernie's is what I'm thinking of less. But anyway, so
Yeah.
the insides are out. The insides are out. That's
Right.
perfect.
Yeah.
And they're being dried, right? They're being desiccated, not desecrated, but
Right.
desiccated,
Right, difference.
which means the water is being drawn out. They're going to wash the inside of that body again with water from the Nile with palm wine, right? Maybe a little sip of palm wine because it's getting a little stinky around here. They're going to kind of mop out the inside of that body, and they're going to put these little packets that are full of that natron, right? That powdered material, the drying agent, inside that body. They're going to stuff it full of them because you got to dry that inside, right? As well. And then they're going to put it on a kind of special tilted table. And some of this stuff looks like the modern things you might see in,
funeral home
or funeral home or in the the morgue or autopsy room. That's going to be a little slanted. It's going to have a hole because you're going to have that liquid has to have some place to go. Right. And it takes out a bunch. You can do an experiment on potatoes, and one day in, there's just water on top of that baking soda that you put on top. Right. And as the days go on, it actually starts looking like a mummy when you're done.
It makes me think of those little silica packets when you open a new electronic or something.
Yes, it is like that.
Right, dehydrating.
Or like the thing you put in the damp rid.
Right.
If you've ever had damp rid in a really humid place, you will see the water in there. Similar, right?
Right.
For sure. So it took about 400 pounds, we think, of this material to desiccate a single individual.
Per body.
Yeah, per body. That's a lot. And they describe bringing it back on the plane.
Oh boy.
From Egypt because they wanted everything to be as authentic as possible.
Right.
And I guess one of the cameramen had some and everybody had some and they didn't realize how much it was going to take. Also probably looks a little bit like illegal substances.
So, right. That's funny to me to imagine. All right, we need to get 400 pounds or so of this material back to the United States. We don't want to pay for one 400-pound piece of cargo.
How do we make it not look like drugs?
What's the carry-on limit? What's make it not look like drugs? What's the carry-on limit? And they have to pay for extra baggage. So, all right, camera guy, you get 20 pounds. So you get 20
and I'm sure
pounds.
that's what it was like. I'm not positive, but I'm sure. They were like, here, you carry some in your bag and you can have some.
And I would hope they would let the airport know beforehand, hey, we're coming in. This is what we got. Nothing
It makes for some great stories though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So then they're going to leave this body alone. Right, for a long time, for 40 days plus. And they realized it needed a little bit longer than they thought when they were doing the modern mummy. But also what they realized was that after, at the point where Herodotus said it was done, it was still a little moist, or moisty as we like to say, but then they could still bend and it wasn't brittle.
Right.
So there's something to be said for that. So you're not breaking off pieces of this body. So maybe they did take it out a little bit early, right?
Right.
So, and then they're going to take all of that off the mummy, right? When it's done drying out, they're going to wash the body again because it's going to be full of that grainy stuff. And then they're going to anoint the body with different oils, usually mixed with animal fat because oils are expensive, right? And so the animal fat sort of extends that and they're putting it all over the body. And then sometimes they would take the resin and paint it on the outside of the body too, because the last thing you want is your body rehydrating at any point.
Right.
And it can. And then the decay process starts.
You want to seal it.
Yeah, so you want to kind of seal it.
Like you seal your deck after you get a new deck.
You put the sealant on. It's the exact, it is, to an extent it is that exact idea. It was, believe it or not, these tombs and different things in Egypt have flooded over thousands of years. They have deluges and things. It's dry most of the time, but not all of the time.
Right.
For sure.
And that may be one of the reasons beyond ritual and spiritual reasons of entombing, especially the important and higher ups and whatever, in multiple, like a what do you call it, a Russian doll.
Oh yeah, like a stacking doll
of sarcophagus and coffin, because not only just for ritual, but ancient people were not dumb people.
No,
they're just as smart, if not smarter, because they could focus their intention and all their time onto one specific thing and get really good at it. So all these different layers. Maybe not just for ritual, but they would know we have floods, we have deluges. This chamber is going to get filled with water over and over again, or whatever happens.
Right?
Or maybe it might. We don't but to cover all the bases to protect this body for the afterlife for as long as possible. We're going to make multiple seals. We're going to seal the body.
It could have done that for sure, right? Not only did it provide layers of magical protection, it could have provided some physical protection as well. That's actually something I'd never thought of. Another thing.
It's the physical protection, but not just from grave robbers and things like that, but just from the elements. Yeah, you are, maybe not every person back then had obviously a pyramid built for them or down in there. Egypt is so much more than Giza,
Pyramids were a very
pyramid.
short period of time. It tends to be a beacon for come steal my stuff, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, right. So they will be put in multiple places. Not everyone's going to be down in a sealed off tomb. Some
No,
people are
most
going to
people
be
aren't going to
more
be.
vulnerable to
Yeah.
the elements. And so,
Some people are going to be in their families' homes.
yeah.
So they would take that body home and there would be a place where they would have everybody. You know, you could visit grandma, great grandma.
That's fascinating.
Yep.
Now we do that today with
Urns, full of ashes,
urns.
cremains, yes.
Exactly. And I don't
Yeah.
think many people hopefully don't have.
I have some cremains of my mom and dad, little ones.
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Cremate of my dad.
But
and
most people
right.
don't have a body in their home.
That's what I mean. Like grandma's not.
We're
in
not
the
like
rocking
Psycho,
chair.
the Psycho movie. Ah,
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
Thinking the same thing there.
Yikes.
She had to be a little mummified too in that chair to be able to tolerate her.
Yeah.
Just a random side thought.
Yes. Muscles.
Well, they're gonna shrink, right? Because
Yeah.
they're mostly water.
Yeah.
So they're gonna be there, but you know, everything is kind of shrunken down. And so they do try to kind of plump the body up. And that's part of the putting on of the oils and the fat is to kind of give some life back to that skin, right?
Yeah.
And then also, you know, stuffing them full of different things, whether it be sawdust, whether it be linen, whether it be old papyrus, you know, documents, like it's kind of like newspapers or whatever.
Right.
They're going to stuff that in there, trying to give it, you know, back a little bit of its,
Fill it out.
Yeah,
So it doesn't look like
Right.
a piece of, not to be too graphic, like beef jerky after a bit.
Well, it does look
fills
like beef
out.
jerky. And
Yeah.
it continues to look like that. You really can't solve that problem, right? But you can help it a little bit.
Yeah.
And it does look like beef jerky. That is a way I help people understand, like in my classes, what a mummy feels like or looks like. Because it's dehydrated meat.
Now, would there be a period of time though? Yeah, everything becomes beef jerky eventually.
We are meat.
Right. But after the mummification process, it's probably not all of the time, at least, that mummification process is done. Seal it, sarcophagus, coffin,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that there's a period of time in a lot of the post-death process where the body is on display, is moved.
Well, it's from going to place, right? So we've got the body, it's completely dried out to our satisfaction.
Right.
We've anointed it, we've, you know, done all of those kind of things. Then it's going to be going through a whole ceremony, and it's a long one where it's going to be wrapped, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the kind of fluffing up of the body too, because I mean, they used yards and yards, like 400, I think, of linen, right? To wrap these things and give it, you know, fluff.
Right, fluff in the shape of a
Yeah,
person.
exactly.
And right, you want to be remembered as long as possible, more or less in the, I would say not even in the shape you were when you died, but they might have fluffed up to make you look like when you died, you were more youthful and strong and robust.
Sure, and you're going to be your best self, right? In this afterlife.
Right.
You know, the idea is like the perfect kind of extension, reflection, you know, of your life.
You know, my dad died in 2013, and not to get too deep here, but the dreams I had of him after he died, and still the dreams I have of him. When he died, he was frail.
Sickly,
we think he
my dad
might
was
have
the
had
same.
cancer or something. He didn't tell us, but he deteriorated
Sure.
before he died. But in my dreams, and I remember him, he is
Healthy.
35 years old,
Yeah.
37. Like he's
Yeah.
like his chest is big still, and I can hug him and
His
things
most
like
ideal self, physical self.
that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you, in the mummification
course.
process and the presentation,
Yeah.
maybe not want to be remembered as whatever frail state you may have been in when
You
you
want to be
died,
remembered as your best
a little
self.
filled out. Yeah, exactly.
100%.
So that makes total complete sense.
Well, and when they're wrapping this mummy too, it's a fabulous process. And another thing they figured out during this modern mummification, they had found these tables in ancient Egypt, a few of them anyway, that were like slats, right? Like almost like a railroad looking thing with slats. And they're
Right,
like, what in the
space
world is
between
this
the-
for?
yeah.
Well, those are wrapping boards, because it turns out to wrap a mummy on a flat table, you'd be flipping it back and forth, right? This way you could pass those
underneath.
bandages underneath. Okay.
Makes total sense.
So as they're wrapping, they're offering, you know, incantations, their prayers, and placing little amulets at, you know, specific parts of the body as well. So it's a really long process. The process of that wrapping.
So how long do you have any sort of ballpark for?
Gosh, this is information that I would have known at some point, but it's days and days. It's not.
Right.
It's not a short process,
Not
right?
one-
And again, it's going to depend on when this, you know, mummification took place. It's also going to depend on how wealthy you were, what you could invest in it.
Right.
So we have to be realistic, right? There's the, economy versus the luxury package.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think back to the point I made several minutes ago about we tend to think of the mummification process in our brains. We shorten it down to like a few hours.
Right.
This whole process
No.
is done. They're done in a few hours. This is days and days and days,
Right.
if not weeks and possibly months of a process.
And unless you're nobility, you're probably in a place where they're mummifying multiple bodies, right? Because
Right.
think about it, there's people dying all the time.
Yeah.
So, you have different areas and they move them through. So yes, it's a multi-stage process. It takes a long time. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because even in modern times, my mom is a funeral director. She's been a
No
funeral director
way.
I want to bring her through death by natural
Oh,
causes
yeah.
and just say, how would you prepare this?
Oh, I totally would love to meet your mom.
This person died in the bathtub with a toaster. This person died of bubonic plague, and just have her. She's very
Pragmatic.
about it. She, well, her claim to fame, and I need to get her on a podcast soon, is she'll take not to get too morbid of it, but she wants to do the best for the family,
Of course.
possible.
Yeah.
So she prides herself on where maybe some funeral directors would say, this is a closed casket. We can't.
She's going to try to make it work.
She's going to make it work. And more often than not, she does make it work.
I know, and I think it's amazing.
Reconstruction
Yeah.
was her specialty. She taught people all over the world how to reconstruct and give the families that wanted it
That gift.
that gift
Yeah.
of remembering. Some people don't want to see open casket.
They don't.
I mean, sure, but a lot of people do, and
It's
it
very
means a
cultural
lot.
too.
Yeah.
And in our culture, I said many of us in the culture we're in have this separateness from death now.
Right.
They don't want to see it. They don't.
about it,
They want to
see it.
remember people the way they were, and I can
Right.
totally understand that.
Right.
My opinion only is I think there's something cellular about death that you really need to experience in order to understand that person's gone.
Right.
And that's just me. I think it's horrific sometimes, but healing.
Yeah.
But she gave that gift to people who wanted it without having to maybe be so traumatized as they might have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that
It's a gift.
My
She's a
mom's
beautiful
also,
lady for
Yeah, my mom's also very religious. She's a saint.
Yep.
And this was her service
Sure.
to God.
Sure.
Is to
I
give
understand that.
families that peace and
Yeah.
do the best by the families, do the best by the individuals.
Absolutely.
It was kind of a half joke in our house. My dad was a newscaster here for
Mm-hmm.
a long time. And I'll say Alan Hemberger, if anyone remembers, Channel 13.
I remember
CW.
him.
Yeah.
Lifelong Houstonian.
So he would report on a terrible,
Horrible things, yeah.
motorcycle crash or whatever. He'd report on it.
And your mom would.
My mom would be the one fixing that exact person. And so there was a lot of, you wouldn't think
Overlap.
there was overlap in their,
I'm
in their
sure.
careers. Dad would report on it. Mom is the one who said,
taking care of that family.
take care of that family. And that, it was such a horrific accident as motorcycle accidents usually
yeah.
are, that she said, no, I'm giving the gift to the family. I'm going to do my best and do my best
Mm-hmm.
work to make sure that they can remember their loved one
in the best possible
in
way,
the best possible way.
given the circumstances, for
Right.
sure.
So the whole industry of death, I guess.
Yeah, it
call
is. It's an industry.
It is an industry, and it was so back then.
yeah,
Is so today.
absolutely.
Right.
We don't change as much as we'd like to think we do.
Maybe our rituals obviously change a bit,
Somewhat.
and I'm sure there are people out there that can, if they have enough money and resources, they can get mummified. Maybe.
I'm sure that's true. Yep, I am
some
sure
cultures.
that's true.
I haven't heard too much in the United States about that,
No,
but who knows?
pet-wise for sure. I've heard
Pets.
some. Yeah, pets.
Pets. Before we move on to pets, because pets were mummified, and we will get to that. Okay, so what's next in this process here? There's these little, you said there's things put inside.
Sure. So
of the
they've
body.
got amulets and jewelry and different things, again, depending on what you wanted or how much money you had or whatever the case may be. So those are going to be inside the wrappings, and there's going to be things in some cases outside the wrappings as well. And on Oncop here, he's got pieces of this leftover material called cartonnage, which is kind of essentially like a paper mache.
Okay.
Right, that they would make. And so they could make face masks, they could make body things to cover the body. They even made whole coffins out of it. And it would dry, and they would paint it, really beautiful colors that we are familiar with if you like ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And that would go either directly on the body, or it could be, like I said, the coffin itself.
Right.
For sure. And we have some of those here in our collection at the museum. Really beautiful cartoonage coffins.
What are these right behind you? What are these little trinkets?
These little guys, I call them ubshete, but they can also be called shabati.
Okay.
They are little figures, little mummiform figures.
Mm-hmm.
Should I stay out of the way?
I'll get a B-roll of it.
Okay, so they're little figures that are going to do your work for you in the afterlife. So they're going to wake up, they're going to come and they're going to, bake your bread or plow your fields or do whatever it is that you need.
I don't want to reduce it down to this, but I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I've watched the Minions movies over many, many times, and it makes me think of your own personal minions to do your
work.
Do your work. And Minions, that has a connotation of like evil and you're working for like your bad guy. That's not it. But as far as like helpful little fellows that are
people that are gonna come alive magic, the afterlife, right. You have mummified meat, or I call it meat mummies, in different foods that also magically are going to be something that you can eat in the afterlife, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of magic involved.
Right.
Right. And they fully, knew that they were going to have those meals or have those people to help them.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so neat.
For sure.
So animals, pets, we'll get B-roll of. We have a few mummified animals in our Hall of Ancient Egypt. The Hall of Ancient Egypt is a permanent exhibit.
Yes, it is.
You don't have to pay extra to see all this fancy stuff. So pets, and let's just be more general.
Yes.
Animals.
Animals, yes. All kinds of animals were mummified.
All kinds, but let's start with pets.
Okay.
Or special animals within the family or the royal family.
Sure.
Or whatever. What would happen if someone really, 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 really loved their cat?
They would mummify that animal much in the same way that they would mummify a person, right? Extracting the moist, wet parts, drying the body out, anointing it, wrapping it. Different levels of care to that, obviously. Again, cost or time period. Mm-hmm. And those animals would often end up entombed or with, their people.
Ooh, that's an interesting auxiliary question is, let's say a person died before their pet. They had a cat, and a cat can live, around 20 years, a long time, 15, 20 years a cat can live.
Yeah.
Now, their owner, their mommy, their daddy passed away, and the cat is, 5 years old, healthy, thriving.
Are they going to
ritualistically...
I don't know the answer to that question. However, I do know
some of them.
Sure. Probably. I would generally think I would agree with you. Probably some people, right?
Some cases.
But I also have to believe, humans and their love for pets is sort of something that's always existed.
Right.
And there were probably instances too that pet lived its life, was, later mummified upon passing, and then maybe included in the tomb, because we know that other people were, added in some cases to different tombs, at different periods of time.
You were mentioning, before we started the podcast, that once this person was done with their, sarcophagus and coffins and things, that they'd say, okay.
Well, they often repurpose them in kind of hard times. Sometimes you'll find, a mummy in a coffin that clearly was somebody else's, or an older period coffin. So maybe it was like there was a little bit of like repurposing, upcycling, whatever you want to call it.
Maybe they checked, this mummification didn't take.
Or just like, you don't need that anymore. It's been hundreds of years. We're just going to move you out into this little, crypto space, and we're going to go ahead and reuse that coffin. Also, mummies were made of animals for purposes of offerings, right? Mm-hmm. In a specific area or to a specific, important person, whether it be like a pharaoh or whether it be like, a high priest or something like that. Mm-hmm. They had different kind of mummies. You could kind of go to the stall and buy yourself a mummy and then bring it and offer it as an offering.
Yeah.
So that is
a mummified animal.
Yes. And sometimes they were fake because, you could it's easier to wrap up like a bone and make it look like a mummy. They can't x-ray it and see.
And that would totally make sense. It sounds like kind of, cheating people or something like that, but I don't think that would always be the case. I think it was just, it's a issue of access, an issue of privilege, and an issue of what could you afford.
Your budget.
Maybe you couldn't budget for a full calf or something like that. So you might
have a piece of it.
But
I never thought about that.
Some of them were broken up or into different pieces, and you could sell a little for what people could afford. I can afford.
That's a good thing to research. I don't know that. That is entirely possible. But I also think that
Right.
people haven't changed, like we've talked about, over time. And I think that there were people scamming as well.
Well, you have, even biblically speaking, Old Testament, New Testament, a lot of times when people would travel across hundreds of miles to the temple or synagogue or wherever, they couldn't afford it. It wouldn't be feasible for them to bring their offering.
They had to buy it there.
Yeah. And that's the whole
For sure. And
tables.
I think that is that is common throughout time.
So why wouldn't, so exactly. So I'm not saying that we're talking about two different, complete demographics in religious ceremonies and things like that.
Sure.
But it would make sense. I just would not be surprised if
Nothing surprises me.
right if you can sell, maybe you can't afford the whole calf. Here's
a portion.
It fills the criteria of the ritual.
It's a placeholder. It's a meaningful and
right.
representation. Sure.
And
it's the best you could do.
It's the best you could do. It's the best that family could afford to participate in the ritual.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford the whole calf. You can afford a bit of it, and it still fulfills that
Absolutely
ritualistic requirement. It makes total sense. Okay, so now what about, would people, we mentioned that they would mummify animals or pets and then sometimes take them with them. It would be the pet, if the cat died a few years after the owner died, mummify the cat and put it with
the person
owner.
in the person's tomb or area. Sure.
Could families or pet owners also, they really love this cat and they just want to preserve it for their own process. They want to have this cat in their home or on their property, in their land somewhere.
Well, I would assume yes, because not everybody and almost nobody really, when you're talking real numbers, had a tomb.
Right.
That's going to be something for very wealthy people. Very not the normal people, not the everyday.
Right.
People like us.
Typical.
We wouldn't have a tomb.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have a mausoleum, right?
Right.
So yeah, I can see that.
And that's not too far-fetched even to imagine, because I since we're on this kind of morbid subject, we've got a cat named Jack. He's very big. You've maybe seen him on my Facebook.
I have.
I've joked with my wife. Disclaimer around this part, that like, and I never actually do it, but I might just taxidermy. Like you have people taxidermy like deer mounts.
Yep.
You can't
taxidermy your cat.
But just get a little plaque and taxidermy his noodle, his head on there, like a lion. Like, I don't advocate for this, but like a lion. You think about like some late 1800s collector of things, and he's killed a lion, and now he's mounted the lion in his trophy room, and the head of the lion or whatever. But out of Jack, put like a bottle opener in his mouth.
So he's a functional part of your family still.
So he's a functional, and that's a horrible thing.
No,
I'm not going to do
you
this.
Love your
I'm
kitty. You love your kitty,
yeah.
and I know you do. So it reminds me of the Hotel New Hampshire, and if you haven't read it, you should. They taxidermied the dog, and then it came out of the closet on accident, like it fell, and it gave somebody else a heart attack. So it was like this horrible chain of events because they taxidermied the family dog.
But that's the thing. That's what I'm saying is people today, some people,
they do
taxidermy their pets. Not mummify them. They taxidermy them.
And you know what? To each their own. Whatever way you want to remember your pet or honor your pet. I just tend to not have judgment about those kind of things because the animal is dead, the person is dead. Whatever it is that makes you happy and makes you feel better.
Exactly.
Because it's really about the person who's living or the living entity that all of this is for anyway.
Right.
For the most part. I mean, when you take spirituality out of it, so. Yeah, for sure.
It's up to the individual. And again, I'm not judging anybody. Part of me actually thinks it's kind of neat.
I do too.
Like taxidermy a pet. It's really morbid. I don't know if I want to walk by it.
I don't think it's morbid.
Every day.
I don't think it's morbid.
For me, but
for you.
But each person has their individual taste. I'm not sure. Like, even if I would want to taxidermy my pet, my cat, maybe I would think that's a good idea at first, and then after like a couple of days, like, okay,
like, now I'm done, and you
let's
can
just
go
dig in the
find a
backyard
resting place for that animal. And, yeah, for sure.
Do you know of any other cultures that mummified their
Pets?
dead?
Or dead?
Just dead humans.
Yeah, there are definitely other cultures. There's purposeful mummies, right? Like, or intentional mummies, like you see here.
Prepared on purpose to be
mummies, and there's ones where. Is it an accident or is it not an accident? We put these bodies in this place, in this cave, and obviously they've been back there, so they know what's going to likely happen. So is that an incidental, or is that a purposeful mummy?
Yeah, and then you have accidental mummies, which you find, early
In
humans
bogs.
in ice.
Yeah.
There was a girl, in recent history, thousands of years old, but she died in a glacier, basically.
But see, the Iceman,
Yeah.
yep, he had, we could see his stomach contents, the tattoos on his flesh. He had like lots of artifacts and different things. And he did, the glacial cycles and, melting, the
Refreezing,
uppush, right?
Mhm.
Bodies show up.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there are about, not to get, again, this is just a morbid
It's
podcast.
okay, it's not morbid.
The climbers on Mount Everest.
For sure. Oh, I was just watching something about that. I was fascinated with that for a year or so in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's,
They're still there.
they are. They've been
died
starting to
decades
move some
ago.
of them, or at least they can't really take them down. It would be dangerous.
Yeah.
You don't want another body.
Right.
But, some of them are being put in crevasses or moved out of view, at least, right?
Yeah.
But there's some of the famous ones like Green Boots, who incidentally has been moved. He's no longer in the little cave there. But yeah, for sure. I mean, they are freeze-dried.
But that's what I'm saying. You're on top. You are 34,000 feet wherever you are when you finally succumb. But you're up there, low oxygen.
Yep.
It never
Wind,
ever
cold,
gets above
humidity,
freezing.
no humidity.
No, it's
Yeah.
dry. It's freezing all the time. You are just going to be there. And that's what's freaky to me about that or interesting, is you can't. Part of the reason why they're there is it's just way too dangerous to move them down.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's logistically they have to stay, but they're wearing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a neat glimpse. And in a way, it's kind of like a way that if you're a mountain climber, you might want to be remembered as you were doing
Each
what you
person's
loved.
probably different, but perhaps. And also, I think that when you say morbid or macabre, and maybe there is an element of that to it, but I also think that, this is how I see my interest in death, which I've had since I was a child, because I have so much anxiety, right?
Right.
And when I was a child, I was like, oh, I'm worried my mom and dad are going to die. I was dreaming about it all the time. I got interested because it was a way of controlling it,
Right.
and a way of understanding the process and coming to terms with it's okay.
Right.
Right? It's the end for all of us at some point or another, like it or not.
Yeah. Death is part of life.
And so an interest in it is completely natural, completely human, and I don't think it is bad.
No.
Right? As much as people don't want, my mom used to go, I wish you'd find something more uplifting to be interested in.
This is uplifting.
Yeah, I think it is. I think in
that's-
this case especially, because Egyptians didn't see it, I don't think the same way we might see it. They were like, this is just a little interlude. My life,
Right.
I've been preparing for this next part of my life, my whole life on this earth, right?
This was the opening act.
Yeah, and it's just not even an end. There was just a continuation, right? And I just think it's actually quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And
And
they
I
had a
would
healthy
agree.
view, I would think.
And I would agree. And I do want to clarify when I say morbid and whatever.
No, and I think that's good too. I
it's
think
completely in different people's
we
opinions
get judged
and
for it.
tastes.
We get judged for it though, and I think that's a way of saying, I'm not a total creep, which you're not, right? And neither am I. I'm a very thoughtful person, empathetic. I think you are too.
Yeah.
That's why I like you.
Right.
But it is, it's a judgment. I mean, if you're in there wanting to dig in body parts or something, that's more.
Yeah, we're
that's
not talking
probably
about
creepy.
serial killers.
But
or
just having an
anything.
interest in things like that, I think, is quite natural.
Yeah.
Just not everybody admits it.
You would never know my mom. You would never have any clue what she did for a career for decades.
I'm
And this is
dying to meet her now,
and she
so to speak.
Yeah.
Oops, I did not mean it.
She started her career after she had 5 kids. We all flew the coop, and she went to funerary school after we all flew the coop.
Here in town?
Yeah. Dignity Memorial is where she
No
worked
kidding.
for a long time.
That's so cool.
So she was at Heights Funeral Home for a long time. She started in the Kingwood area, and then moved to Heights Funeral Home in the Heights.
I think it's a calling.
It is a calling. That's exactly right. And that's what I'm saying is you would never know by looking at her, talking to her all sweet and kind of quiet and everything like that she did this kind of work. Not just that she did this kind of work, but that she was at a time not even figuratively, the best in the country.
When it was a male-dominated industry as well.
That's true too.
Totally. She's probably my age. How old is she?
She's 76.
Oh, she's older
78.
than me. Okay, so I'm 54.
Yeah, she's
Not
born
quite
1940.
But even more so that.
Yeah.
Even more so. It would have been very odd to see a female in her position with her skill level
at that completely
time
earned
period.
at that time period, but at the level, completely earned level of respect and accomplishment. You never know by looking at her that's what she did, and it's not to her. The funny thing about this, and it's all tied to what we're talking about. The interesting thing about her is that she'll put together a motorcycle victim.
Mm-hmm.
She cannot watch scary movies or slashers or any of those gory movies.
Yep.
She can't do it. She'll put and I said, why can't you
she'll want to see the destruction.
She says she doesn't like to see the glorification of murder and of destruction. That in real life, when these things, even though they're all Hollywood produced, everything, that if they happen in real life, there is a huge circle of pain and sadness around that.
And she knows that circle.
Right, and she doesn't.
She's empathetic, so she can't not think about it.
Right, even though it's fake, even though it's not a real person, it's the special effects. She can't stomach the glorification of murder
or the monetization of like death and destruction.
She says if she
makes her
watches
anxious,
a movie
probably.
And someone gets like stabbed in a movie or a TV show or something like that, her heart hurts.
Yep.
She has to turn it off, whatever. Like that's so interesting that you be so genuinely hurt by seeing the glorification of murder, and then your daily work is to restore.
And I can totally get where she's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And now I personally can watch, if I have context around it and I'm prepared, I can watch and even appreciate the story within some more graphic shows or movies or whatever, because I make things, I produce content. I kind of know. I'm thinking like the special effects. How did they do that? What is? I'm thinking of the technicals behind it. So I'm not so. Some of it's bothering. Some of it's genuinely disturbing. It all depends on the context of the story.
Sure.
But yeah. So I'm the opposite. I can watch the stuff. I can isolate and compartmentalize what I'm seeing. I cannot do what she does.
Right. It's interesting.
Get my hands dirty that way.
Right. And I'd be more in your mom's camp, even though I don't think I could do what your mom did or does rather, but I also have problems with the violence and the, gratuitous sort of things. It makes me upset. It makes me anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It hurts. It hurts her spirit. Probably hurts your spirit. It's a different thing. You can be very fascinating. I think people,
I love this. Somebody clearly cared for this individual.
Exactly.
Right. It's the beautiful thing. It's not a scary thing. It's not gross. And when I talk to children about it, we're always very sensitive. If they don't want to come by it, they don't have to. But mostly they're fascinated. And if you present it in a way that this person was an individual, this person was obviously very loved and isn't this, really wonderful.
Right.
As children, they're so much more accepting and they're so much more able to absorb that kind of information and, have a positive, outlook.
And when they can understand it, when they can relate to it.
Yeah.
It's not just, here's a dead body.
Exactly. No, it's like, it's not a thing to be gawked at. Like, this is a thing, this is somebody who deserves respect. It's somebody's brother, sister, mother, father, insert whatever thing that helps you to understand. Right.
Somebody mourned.
Absolutely. Somebody was real likely brokenhearted, but because they weren't going to get to see them until later in their minds. But they definitely believed, there was this continuation.
Right.
So this hopefulness.
And this is all done out of respect. It's not done out of, wouldn't it be cool if we tried this?
Yeah.
No, this is done out of a genuine place in the heart.
And I think about I think it's this new series, Mortician or whatever it is. Have you heard about that yet?
No. No. Is it out yet?
Yeah. And it's about this guy who really did not treat the dead appropriately.
Oh, yeah.
So I sort of make this
I've heard about that.
And I think that for the most part, that is not a thing, but it does happen probably during this time period too, where there was people, stealing.
Being
disrespectful. There's a lot of expensive stuff going into some of these mummies. They would, do the thing and then, before the mummy was moved, go ahead and take some of those, items out.
Right. If there was something valuable on the person or like in more modern times. I'm not sure if ancient Egyptian dentistry was up to this point, but if someone had a gold tooth.
That's what in this TV show that he was, But sometimes we can see the mistakes that the embalmers made. Like there's like a bowl of resin stuck to the back of somebody's head that they just went ahead and wrapped, or like a wooden tool broken off, that they went, can't get that out. And you can't see it unless you have a CAT scan or an X-ray.
We do. One of our mummies back here, we have the whole CT
All
scan
through
and
the
everything.
body.
You can see the whole thing. It's really, really cool.
It's very cool.
I was going to say in reconstruction, I didn't know how much we were going to talk about reconstruction, modern reconstruction, like what my mom does. But some people are in a state that, like I said, she took pride in taking the impossible open casket and making an open casket. So there is quite a bit of, I'd say, non-organic material and tools used.
It's probably organic, but they would replace missing limbs.
That's what I'm saying, right? And
like a piece of a wooden leg or with the foot fashioned.
Yeah.
And for because they were going to have that in the afterlife, right? Then they would fix it so it would be perfect.
In modern times, they'll take with the face, they'll put clay and they'll mold it into putty and fill it out and do the sutures and things in a way that are
is less visible
or cleverly hidden, or it's done back here or in the hair or something like that. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. So maybe not necessarily a tool being broken off during the brain removal of a mummy, but that does not surprise me in the absolute slightest. That thing is
also, what are you going to do about it at that point? It's like,
you just do your best at each
people make
each
mistakes,
way,
so.
and there can be complete mistakes. Like you said, the
thing stuck there. Is it better to pull it
resin.
off and pull his head off, or just go ahead and
let's just wrap it up? And
he has wooden pieces.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he does. Now the thing is, I don't know if they were put there like during the mummification process. I suspect not. I suspect they were added later. Used like they unwrapped him, wrapped him back, and oops, that piece needs to be, fleshed out. We're going to sell him. We're going to do whatever. So he needs to look whole. But he's definitely got wood inside of him in areas.
And that is not even surprising.
No.
What is this? There looks like ornate on his chest and everything. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is part of the cartonnage that we were talking about, the kind of paper mache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, they would do it so it would be molded to the body. And this would be, in this case, it looks kind of like it was made specifically for him. So they would be making this and putting it together while the body's being mummified, right? And so they would make the paper mache thing and dry, then they'd paint it with beautiful designs.
It's so unbelievably amazing to me. And this is one of the cool parts about a museum, obviously. First of all, I think that in the modern world, museums are allowed to occupy the space of that gray area of controversy. But that museums, by their nature, to teach and have teachable moments, have things that are controversial.
Sure.
Not much is more controversial than Egypt in the history of Howard Carter and all that. But amid that controversy, you can still do things ethically. We have an Egyptian on site. It's 365 days a year. We work closely with the Egyptian consulate. Like, it's all. We support above board.
Yes.
We support repatriation, all that good
100%.
stuff. But this person exists here right now for us to learn from.
Yeah.
And one of the crazily fascinating things to me is this is thousands of years old.
Yeah. He's from the Ptolemaic period, so this would have been kind of later.
Okay.
Right. So the Greco-Roman sort of the later period.
Right. But the color is still here.
Isn't it beautiful?
I can get 6 or 7 inches away from what somebody prepared all that time ago and really appreciate.
That's what fascinates me.
The intricacy and the care.
In this wooden coffin, this would have been a luxury coffin.
Yeah.
It's wood because Egypt does not have a bunch of trees, right? So this would have had to be imported. So there's little things you can kind of glean if you know a little bit about the history of ancient Egypt at different times.
In paleontology, they call them trace fossils. So a trace fossil would be like the preserved footprints in some mud, or that horseshoe crab that got into the anoxic area, and then you can see he turned back to try to get to oxygen. He didn't make it. That's a trace fossil. It tells such a story.
In the feces is a trace fossil. It's any evidence of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see an artifact, a specimen like this, there's so much, it's not fossils, but trace history.
Yeah.
I can imagine, you can't see it with the way I'm doing it right here, but it looks like a spoon to me. It's the shape of it, but I can just imagine the person
Painting.
yeah, and even not just the broad strokes like up here with the red and
The tiny
green and blue.
details.
Yeah, there's a woman's hand here, kind of.
There's so much detail.
There's fingers in it, and we can still see it.
Yep, it's fascinating.
Today.
I love the artwork as well. I love that. And I always think of the artists. That's part of what I do too. I think of the human beings that were involved in everything. Yep.
And that closes
That's the story.
Right, and that closes
Really.
the time gap.
It does.
Sometimes, not to mention, animals millions of years ago, but human beings and what they were doing thousands of years ago. It's kind of incomprehensible to think about that how much time has passed and everything. But if you look again at the fingers of this woman's hand, that someone took the time
to make sure each individual finger.
Yeah.
Yep.
With a very fine tipped
reed brush.
Style, whatever they're stylus, whatever their reed brush, that they took the time. And
They couldn't just run out to Michael's or to Texas Art Supply either.
Right.
They had to make these, they had to mix their paints with binders, grind their pigments, collect their pigments. They had to, make their reed brushes by like chewing on the ends of them and trimming them up or, pounding them with a mallet. Everything had to be made.
And I can imagine, and they would have to have enough light on this to see. So whether this was done outside in the open, I'm talking about is a sarcophagus?
This mummiform coffin, yes.
Right, mummiform coffin being either outside in the sunlight, the same sun that shines on us.
Yep.
And the sun had a lot of more importance to them religiously back then, that the sun is shining on them, or they're inside and they're using mirrors to collect and then to focus the light.
I would vote for outside.
I would vote for outside also.
Outside.
But there
if
are,
I had to say, but there are,
right.
Either
way, they got light. They got
did.
light on this, and I can
plenty,
imagine.
Obviously.
Yep, and the person got light on it, and they were able to. They probably had, in relation to this coffin right here, where I'm standing, they probably had their table or whatever, their tools set up,
their palette,
about right here, somewhere very close by, and they were here. Or maybe it was at the, probably not laid on top, but I like to imagine
you like to imagine the scene.
The scene of what there, because there was a scene.
You should be a historical illustrator. I love those books. I still love those books where like the DK books, or there's a British series, I can't remember the name, where they have like artists that have like from the archaeological evidence and from, the primary sources and things, they have recreated pictures of what something may have looked like back then.
Yeah.
And there's a whole mummy, it was in National Geographic, and there's a whole mummy shop or a whole mummification complex, and it fascinates me. I'll have to show it to you.
Okay.
I tore it out and pieced it together because it's like this big.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's just, they have like done like you are doing right here, right? They're sat and they were like, I wonder.
Yeah.
And they went and researched, and then they you have to fill in some gaps, right? With the way we might do something, because again, we're not so different.
Right. And
how would we have solved this problem with what they had?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you, at the very beginning of the podcast, about we tried to recreate mummification in modern time, but only using, to the best of our knowledge, the tools that they had.
And they even had it was at a college, so they even had the students in the art school make the canopic jars and the other pottery that they used. And they had to research what that looked like. So then they had, people do different parts of this.
Right.
Which I just thought was so fascinating to me. Such a cool, multi-directional, multi-layered project. And we actually had that mummy here at the museum during one of our traveling or special exhibits that we had.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And those kind of special projects that those students were undertaking to try to recreate mummification as it would have been back when it was popular in Egypt, that's like the next level of immersion.
It is.
Into understanding.
That's exactly what it is. It's experimental archaeology.
Yeah.
It's experimental archaeology.
I talk about appreciating the fingers in this woman's hand. That's the next step. Is that is trying to do this with the tools that they had. And
in the way they did it, in the environmental conditions as best as you can reproduce them. They're trying to make everything as perfect as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So that it has some integrity.
Right.
Right. Some truthful. It's one thing mummifying somebody in air condition. It's another thing if you control your environment like they did.
Right. And there's an understood, even with all those parameters as tightly controlled as possible, there obviously is some degree of...
They weren't like, embalmers were trained over time in families, right? So they're doing this for the first time.
Right.
So there's going to be some level of like, oh, I didn't know that, livers were that hard to get out of 3-inch holes.
Exactly.
You're
exactly. I love that you said there's a person who was pelted by pebbles ritualistically to desecrate the body in that way. Just understanding. I was going to say with that experiment.
I think Diodorus is where we got that information from. He's another historian from like Greek at that time period that wrote about the cutter. I think it's true. There's other people who kind of question whether or not it would be, but I was like, they're not hurting him, dude. They're just like, it's ritual. We're not going to throw a boulder at him. We're just throwing pebbles and he's running.
And it could have just been like an issue of,
I
don't know if you've ever been...
getting hit by small rocks, don't hit him in the head.
Yeah.
Right? You're just pelting his back. You're just making a good show.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of...
It's ritual.
I was raised Catholic, and doing communion, you're not chugging the wine. Like, it's not like that. Maybe afterwards, whatever. but the ritual, you just go, it just touches your lips, and that's it. And it's a symbolic thing. So why wouldn't the pebble thrower ordeal just be a little...
Or you're just doing, you're fulfilling this necessity without also hurting somebody else, right? Like, he had to make this cut. It was a necessary thing, right? But it was an insult, a desecration.
Yeah.
Not desiccation, desecration of the body. So he has to be ritually punished,
or cleansed of that sin or whatever you want to call it.
Now we're good, right? And so we can move on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the pebbles may have just been, sand is pebbles.
Yeah, we've got these little pebbles that we're saving for this. They're not very heavy or whatever. We'll just lightly chunk them at you while you run. Right. We'll give you a head start.
Yeah. Or it could just be like...
That's how it was in my family. I was the youngest of the bunch, and we'll give you a head start.
Give you a head start.
And then we're going to start pelting you with things.
You know what? So elementary school, this is back in the early 90s, where the matrix that the playground was in, now it's all like wood chips
or soft
foam
rubber,
or something like that. Cool, fine. Back in the day,
pebbles.
It was rock pebbles.
Yeah.
And
I'm a 70s grown-up kid. Yep. Handfuls of them.
That hurt.
See, but you're alive.
I know. I'm not advocating.
And they weren't trying to kill him, I don't think.
No. Right. But I'm saying I've had, when I was 7 years old, another 7-year-old hurl an actual pebbles as hard as they could, and that hurts. That's probably most likely not what was happening in this case.
I don't think they were looking. They needed him to come back for their living.
Exactly.
Right? He was probably a designated guy who was like, I'm just going to be the person who cuts dead bodies open.
Yeah.
So this is how I make my money.
Yep.
So, and they needed him too. So it's, a symbiotic deal. They're not going to hurt him.
You could drop a couple pebbles on my shoulder. Part of the ritual. It's fine.
Just tough softly from a distance.
Yeah, just
exactly.
Fulfill the ritual and
move along.
Move on to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me my money.
Money.
Let's move on to the next.
Isn't it all about money?
If in ancient Egypt, and we can start wrapping this up, I would imagine this would take resources.
Absolutely.
Like we mentioned, most people were not prepared for death in this way.
No. You had to have some, even for like sort of a minimal mummification, you would have to have some sort of means of past subsistence, right?
Right.
And I think a large portion, even in our own country, are subsisting, right?
Yeah. You can...
it's expensive.
Yeah, and you can...
Right?
I mean...
I don't have a funeral savings account.
Do I? I don't think I do. But the point is, you can go to the funeral home and
prepay.
Pick, prepay, and you can pick.
I think the idea here too, right? Some people could do that. Some people can't.
Right. Some people can walk into the funeral home in 2025 and get the $15,000 ornate casket.
My parents did that.
Yeah. Or some people, here's the $500 wood box.
Well, and you'll see that with these mummifications too, and some of the accoutrements and things they had with them. So you'd have a papyrus for the weighing of the heart ceremony, and like for wealthy people, they would be definitely those people painted in there, right? Yeah. And specifically made for them. And then I think, like I like to call it the Walmart of the mummification business. You could go just buy a general one that had like somebody would write your name at the top and a little fill in the blank spot.
Yeah.
It would still serve the same purpose, but it's budget, right?
Right.
It's more affordable.
It's a boilerplate.
Yeah. Or like in the Fayum portraiture time, they would attach like a very realistic, wooden plank with a portrait on it to the face of the mummy.
Yeah.
And some of them were likely the people inside, but they also mass produce these. So that one sort of looks like Aunt Jane. So we'll get that one.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So there's
Like
differences.
it's like if you went to Walmart, if you couldn't afford to take a picture or print out your own portrait or whatever, you go to Walmart and you see like the stock photos that they have inside. Like that kind of looks like me, Ma.
Good enough. Or like, that little license plate from the, trinket shop says Kathleen. It's just not quite spelled right. That'll work.
Right.
You have to budget and they did.
There's no H in this Johnny.
Right.
It says Jonny.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's close. They don't have the H with my name.
They never had Kathleen, so it's Kathleen, Catherine, whatever.
Right. You just take what's closest.
You take what's closest, or you take what you can afford in this case. But it served this purpose, this magical, magical would be a better purpose. And so it worked.
Right.
It was good enough. Good enough.
Well, Kat,
and isn't that just what we want? Good enough.
Yeah. It depends on.
Sometimes good enough is okay.
Yeah. The way I'm thinking about it,
as long as it gets you to the other side.
Yeah. After I'm passed away, I obviously don't really care. I mean, I want to be remembered in a good way, but I personally, I don't need all the
with all your podcasts. Your name,
and-
you will never disappear because the internet is forever.
Right.
So you will never disappear.
And matter of fact, it's kind of like we might be on a touchy subject here. Weddings. We'll wrap it up soon.
That's fine.
But I was never in the camp of big, fancy, expensive wedding.
No.
Like, instead of a down payment on a house, let's pay all this money for
I think a down payment on the house is a much better idea.
Me too. So that's what I'm saying. I am like my bride was also on board with this. We had a very lovely wedding in my mom's backyard. Cost
almost to them.
Almost nothing. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not throwing shade on people who can afford.
Nope. But
the $100,000
you had
wedding.
other ideas.
Right.
I think that is perfectly reasonable, and you adore your wife and your family.
Exactly.
That is clear.
Exactly.
And
Thank
I love
you so
that.
much.
And I love that about you.
I love them very, very much. And I feel very honored and even blessed that my sons get to
be
this is
involved
part of
in
their
this.
life.
Yep.
The museum. Daddy works in a museum. They get
My
to.
daughter grew up here, so I was pregnant. I'd already been here 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And then now she's 22 and graduated. She went to camp here, and then she was a volunteer here. And
That's
then
so cool.
Worked a few things here. And this was a part of her life, and it really made a difference.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
And
It's
those
a
are the
wonderful
important
thing.
things. That's what I'm saying is I don't need all
Fancy
this.
pants.
How I lived is going to be my legacy.
Yeah.
And
Simple.
simple. And
Simple
I'm
is
so happy
fine.
with simple.
Simple is fine.
So happy.
Gets the job done.
Right.
These, the same people would be, doing what they needed to do in the, in their afterlife, in their next life, rather.
There could have been wealthy people back in this time
Yeah.
who had the access to do this ornate death ritual, but were modest and said, even though I'm super rich, I don't want this. Just bury me in the sand.
It's
fine.
entirely possible because there's all kinds of people now.
Right.
And there's all kinds of people throughout time. I just really, the more, we think we change, the more we stay the same.
Right.
Essentially we're the same as we ever were.
With a lot of, I keep saying, we'll wrap up the podcast.
Now with
Please
like
keep going.
electronics, but
Right. Yeah.
internally,
So,
wants, needs, all of that is the same.
right. And people, especially back then, we had this, I don't know where it comes from, but sometimes we have this expectation or this idea that just because people were ancient, they weren't as smart as we were today. We touched on this a little bit, but they were just as smart, if not smarter, and they didn't have all the distractions
Well,
that
they
we
didn't
have
have
today.
crutches that we have today too.
Right. Kat, thank you so much.
This was fun. I get to talk about what I like for however long. That's like a gift to me. It's not working. It's fun.
I said, well, if we get at least 15 minutes of this, it'll be fine. We're probably over an hour.
Yeah, surely.
For sure. Oh, definitely over an hour. That's awesome, though.
Yeah,
Kat,
I really enjoyed this.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, please.
Maybe not specifically on Mummification.
No, I
have
have lots of interests, so we can definitely do something else soon.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. I've been your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. If you can rate the Beyond Bones podcast in your podcast app, please do. We'd very much appreciate it. You can also email us. The email address is podcasts@hmns.org. Be sure to check the podcast description for links and any other goodies. If you'd like to learn more about Egyptian mummification, visit our Hall of Ancient Egypt. It's included with general admission, even at certain times when general admission is free. Check our website for details, hmns.org. Until next time, stay safe, and as always, stay curious.